Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Journaling Through Life Home Edition. Tonight, we are going to chat with Carly. She is the Program Coordinator of Bereaved Families of Ontario, Midwestern Region. Carly, how are you? How are things?
I'm good, Christine. You nailed the name, first of all. Great job. I'm good. I mean, the last, month and a half has been very interesting, as it has been for everyone. But big picture, I am good.
Oh, I'm so happy to hear that. And now a bit of background. Carly and I met first when there was a seminar on children with loss. And I had a vendor table because I literally just started the journals. And you and I think, clicked right away. We were like, yeah, I like that girl.
Totally. I agree. Yes. Yeah, that was October 2017.
A
Yeah,
lot has happened since then, hasn't it?
totally.
And then there was also the training that we did together that I
Yes.
hosted. Yeah, so that was amazing.
Yeah.
So, how are things at the bereavement center? You have virtual programs? How, is that going?
Yeah, so middle of March, kind of same time as a lot of other organizations and businesses needed to switch gears. We started working from home. So we have a small staff of 3. And then I think it was, just the next week, we were able to get our Living with Loss program running virtually. So that's a support group for adults who've experienced a death. Ever since that week, so I think maybe March 24th was our first group, it's been running weekly, which is awesome for people to just have a space virtually where they can connect with other people who are grieving. And then currently, right now, we have 2 of our closed group programs, which are both for bereaved parents. They're 8-week programs, and they're both running virtually as well. So it's definitely been a shift. There's been a lot of manual reworking to make sure that these programs fit in a virtual format. But it's been going well, which is great.
Oh, I'm so glad. And it's so important for everybody to have space at this point to deal with the emotions. And you mentioned just before we hit record that it is an isolating thing when you are going through grief. So that's so important, right? Especially now where people are,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah, like some of the feedback that we've gotten from the groups is, well, and just in general with grief, is it's lonely. You feel alone, even though it is a universal experience. It can be so lonely. So, to have these spaces where you're sitting in front of your computer, but you're able to see other people and listen to other people sharing, that isolation, like we hope, just minimizes a little bit through this time where everyone's experiencing isolation.
Absolutely. And I think that is important to see another human being because in our minds we can be so sort of overthinking things and we can go to those depths, but it is important to know that there are other people and programs like yours. So thank you so much for sharing that. Now, you gave us the open invitation, if you don't mind sharing your own grief and loss story.
Absolutely, yeah. So November 2006, so 14 years ago, if my math is right, this year, my older sister died suddenly. So she had ACL reconstruction surgery, so knee surgery, and then 11 days later, she died suddenly of blood clots in her lungs. So I was 14 at the time. This completely rocked my world, my family's world. I have a younger brother, my 2 parents our family's small, so our extended family is really close. So yeah, this experience just, I feel like, is pivotal in where my life has now led me. So again, I was 14, I was just starting high school, so dealing with all the other awkward, weird things that teenagers have to go through. And on top of that, this weird grief that I really didn't know anything about. I had lost a grandmother before that. But this experience, I can still remember the feeling of being told that she had died, that immediately I didn't feel normal anymore. I knew that, this experience was going to just change my whole life. So fast forward to graduating high school, I was choosing what I wanted to do for post-secondary. I knew that I wanted to help people, so I went into psychology. And then I found the program called thanatology, which is the study of death, dying, grief, and bereavement. And just fell in love. I am the first person to say I am not a school person. I really don't like to study or read textbooks. But finding thanatology was the first time I feel like in my life where I actually wanted to educate myself on what this is, obviously recognizing that my own experience, I could just relate to it. And I feel like being a compassionate and empathetic person, it just kind of all worked together. And then fast forward 4 years through university, I graduated, double majoring in psych and thanatology. And at that point, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew that the grief and bereavement piece was really where my interests lied. So I think I had maybe sent an email to bereaved families and asked if there was any volunteering opportunities. There was. This conference that we were planning on children in grief was coming up in the fall. So I started on that committee, and then the program coordinator role opened up, and I was able to get it. So that's what brings me here.
Thank you so much for sharing your story. Wow. That
Yeah.
is, yeah. Wow.
Mm-hmm.
I am glad that you took that life-altering event and really made it into a purposeful and passionful thing that is for you, but also serving others. And I think that is something that is so important to remember when we are going through trauma and we are going through these really depths of emotions, that, you know, it's temporary. You will see the end of the, or, you know, there will be an end to it at some point. Now, could you please explain to us just some of the ideas, some of the tools, some of the things that helped you through that to get, you know, yourself to a point where you could really heal and move on?
Mm-hmm. I had a feeling you were going to ask that, so I was trying to like reflect back to my 14 to 18-year-old self. And to be honest, those years are pretty foggy in the sense of what I did specifically to help myself through my grief. I think just because as a teen, I was dealing with all these other things, insecurities, emotions, puberty, a new school, new friends. So I don't know if I think the grief was interwoven into all those things. The number one thing that I guess I can say, I'm so blessed to have such a supportive family. My parents being supportive of me and my brother, my grandparents, my aunts and uncles. So having that family support was crucial. Also support from friends. The other thing that I remember that I did do was I was given a journal after my sister died, and I started writing in it like I was writing to her. So I was just sharing, everything that was going on in my life at that time, but it was always writing it to her, like updating her and, venting to her about maybe my brother, my parents, or other things that I was, dealing with at that time. And I think that's one of the ways that I was able to still feel connected to her in some way.
That's beautiful. Yay, journaling. Yes.
I know, yeah.
And I love that idea that you wrote it to her. That is so powerful. Then it keeps her memory alive. It keeps the good parts of her alive, right? But you're also moving on. It's not like you got stuck there. What a powerful, powerful tool to balance all of those things out. Yeah, you were meant to do this job. You were definitely meant to do this.
Oh my gosh, you too. Thank you. Thank you.
Now, in terms of your studies, what can people expect if they are dealing with, like, as an adult dealing with grief versus, we can just touch on it,
Yeah.
kids or teenagers, like you were explaining the teenagers, there's so much, but are there certain really distinct things that differentiate certain milestones in grief as you grow older?
Mm-hmm. So I'll speak for sure from my education and also from my own experience. But for sure with kids and adults grieve very differently. It's kind of unfortunate that we all don't grieve like kids do, because they can be so focused on the emotion or the sadness, missing that person who died. And then a minute later, they can be playing with their friends. So Andrea Warnick, she's a children's grief guru. These are her words. It's like puddle jumping. So these kids can jump in that grief puddle and be there for however long they need, and then they can jump into the other puddle, which is being a kid. Unfortunately, with adults, our brains don't function like that. And grief is just so unique to the individual, to the relationship that each person had with the person who died. But I would say the one way that I kind of it makes sense to me if I look at it in the way that some people, when they're grieving, they need to talk about it, they need to write about it, they need to feel those emotions, they need to cry. They don't even need to cry, they just are crying all the time, or they're expressing whatever emotion they're feeling, and that's just kind of a natural process. Whereas other people grieve in ways that are kind of centered around tasks. So I'm going to do the laundry, and I'm going to drive our kids to their friend's house. Very task oriented grieving. So we can look at these kind of on like a spectrum of grief, in finding the ways that you as an individual, what you need to do for yourself to grieve. Maybe it's a combination of both, maybe it switches one day to another, but to me it's really about like figuring out what makes the most sense for you, and always remembering that it can look so different than the person that you're living with or another person who's affected by the death. Grief is just so unique, which makes it challenging for sure.
Absolutely. And from what I'm hearing from you, sometimes it feels like we're overcomplicating things. So maybe taking those cues from kids to say, it doesn't have to be this overwhelming. You can start, chipping away at it, take it step by step, understanding grief to a very, but in a simplistic way, to say it doesn't
Mm-hmm.
have to be that overwhelming. Take that step back, right? Jump in
Yeah.
your own puddles. Like I was
Mm-hmm.
visualizing
Yeah,
as you were saying it.
totally. Yeah.
That's really amazing, really incredible. And I think for the grief part, how we're experiencing this pandemic now too, is there's that loss component. So I like that you mentioned the tasks, because one of the first things that I've heard from everybody is like, my house is the cleanest and I can't invite anybody over, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That is definitely, I think, being mindful of the fact that being task oriented is how we are dealing with that grief of the normal lives that we have and we probably will never have going forward, right?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
So in terms of the loss though, like are you guys helping the people because they are inside their homes now, as well with the loss component of they can't really go to school, they can't really reach out? How has your grief shifted within this pandemic situation? Because I'm sure there's different challenges now, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's important to note that Bereaved Families is a peer support organization, first off, meaning that we don't offer professional grief counseling. All of the support programs that we run are facilitated by volunteers who are also bereaved. So that's where that peer piece comes in. You're meeting with other people who have also experienced a loss, and get to, speak to their own coping strategies, what worked for them, and then hopefully you can learn from that. And another thing about Bereaved Families is we support death grief. There is a ton of grief that is non-death related. This is a perfect example right now of what's going on in the world. All these non-death losses that we're experiencing. And I think it was important for us to convey this to our facilitators, facilitating our groups right now, that we're still running these groups for people who've experienced the death of someone in their life, but we need to recognize that all this other stuff that's happening right now in people's lives is absolutely going to come into the group, and it always does. When we're meeting in person during our groups, for sure, people are talking about stresses at work and stresses with their family, but for sure right now there's just so much grief, and I think people don't even recognize it, or the word grief isn't really being used.
Right. And I think even if you do use it, the concept could be very foreign. Like for you and I or other people in the industry, it's sort of, offhand, yes, here are the 5 stages, this is what it looks like, right? But
Mhm.
I think as a global society, it's coming back to that idea of, there's like a common knowledge. This is grief. We're all grieving. It's all a loss
Mhm.
of our previous lives. And then to compound that fact. Now, not to go completely off topic, but in terms of funerals and just saying goodbye, like that must have changed significantly as well, just for people not having that closure because of the self isolation. Is that something that you guys have come up with? Or, you know?
Yeah, it's definitely, people have reached out to us for support with that, and we're definitely not the experts with that. But I would say from personal experience and just from what I'm hearing and what people are doing, um, unfortunately, it isn't safe at this point to have probably the type of memorial, funeral, celebration of life that people want to be having. But I think it's so important to still do something. To me, funerals and memorials and celebrations of life, that's where you get to be with the community of people who are also grieving. That grief can be felt. It's in the air. So to not have an experience where you're allowing to feel that and you're around people who are also feeling it, I think it isn't the best thing for your grief process because you're not being able to feel those things. So luckily, virtual live streams, there's been, things being thrown out there that people can do at this time, and recognizing that, if you do something at this time, it doesn't mean you shouldn't do something in the future. Um, Absolutely a in-person, memorial should happen, but I think it's really important that something is done right now because it just doesn't feel right. You're not honoring yourself in your grief. You're not honoring that person who died. So I guess it's about figuring out what's, works for you and your family.
Right, right. And I think you brought up a good concept of like honoring the person and honoring yourself. If we do think about a funeral or a celebration of life, all of those is to bring closure to us. It's not to the person who has already left this world, right? So
Mm-hmm.
maybe this is a time for us also to switch that energy to say, it's also as much as it is external, it's also an internal thing to come to peace with the fact that you can honor them by yourself as well. It doesn't always have to be outside, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. I guess like that speaks to mourning, and typically mourning is done, in society and in groups, but to figure out how do you want to mourn this person who died, and maybe it isn't being with the people that you're surrounded with or the people who are also grieving um, this person.
Right, because I think, like you mentioned previously, in the groups of people come and they bring their stress with them and their family dynamics, funerals. I've been to some where I'm like, you're just bringing that and it's not honoring the person anyway. Not like I'm saying all
Mhm.
funerals are like that, but, this could also be a chance for you just to get closure by yourself. Right. And you don't
Yeah,
have to do it the traditional way because we are moving into something completely crazy and it's not going to be the same.
exactly. Yeah, who knows what it'll look like, but it won't be the same.
Right. But I do like that. And it's important for people to know that there is a mourning time period and there is a mourning process. Now, something we touched on as well is when there is a death or when something is very, very traumatic, it is
Mhm.
very intense emotions. And it's a strange human behavior that after you have healed and you have sort of moved on, sometimes you would think back to that and sort of yearn for that intensity again.
Mhm.
Is that something that you guys are finding, or that you have found in your studies or in your experience?
Yeah, like I can speak to my own experience for sure that I've had moments, throughout the last 14 years since my sister died, where I, exactly what you said, I have this yearning to, not that I don't miss her, not that I don't obviously love her, but I have this yearning to grieve. Like I want to grieve her. For me, what I do is there's certain songs that as soon as I put them on, I am crying and I'm feeling those emotions. Sometimes it's walking to the cemetery where she was buried, or just talking about her with my family. Um, but I think that's such an interesting concept, and I'm interested in doing some research and looking, into what is said about that, because I think it's normal because I've experienced it. I'm sure I'm not alone in it. And again, I probably sound like a broken record, but I think it's just about, figuring out what do you need to do to feel close to that person, and to feel like you're honoring them in your grief, even if it is years after the death happened.
Right. Or even if it's your personal experience, right? Like, what are you missing? What void do you have that you feel the need to go back to that grief? Like, what
Hmm.
is the message for yourself maybe too? I think this is episode 2 of Carly. Can you get back to us?
Yes, yes, I'll do some good research. Yeah, totally, and then I'll bring it back and
Oh,
share.
thank you. Thank you. That's awesome. I'll just put you on the spot.
I love it.
Oh, that's great. Now, in the beginning, you said that, you're a very empathic person, and very compassionate. How do you place those boundaries? Because the world is in grief, the world is in loss, right? How do you, and maybe some tips that you can give to people who are also empathic and who feel the energies all around them, and everybody's loss is their loss. How can you put
Hmm.
those boundaries, those self-care? What are some of the things that can help keep us balanced?
For sure. Such a great question. And man, is it ever a work in progress. Uh, we do a facilitator training when we're training new volunteers, and we talk a lot about boundaries because they're so important. Um, oh my gosh. I think, in looking at the last, almost 2 months of working from home and feeling all this grief that's, in our community, our society, our world. And then for me, being in this space where I am like directly supporting people and managing people to access support. Um, I think it's really important to disconnect in some way, whether that's, social media news disconnect, whether it's disconnect from your usual environment. So what I've been doing is going on walks in my little town. It's like a 50-minute walk, and I'll listen to a podcast. And for me, getting out of my head and listening to whatever podcast I'm listening to really feels like I'm self-caring, if that's a word. Um, and I have to say, Brene Brown and her research on boundaries. She also has a podcast that she has just started. There's so much good advice in what she speaks to in terms of boundaries, because they're hard, especially for people who are empathetic. You want to support people, you want to support your friends. If you're in this similar line of work, you want to support these people, but it's so important to, take care of yourself.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I found that most people are reconnecting to nature. Speaking of podcasts, I heard this thing about birds today, that the louder we are, or the louder a bird's environment becomes, the quieter the birds get. So now ornithologists are studying bird behavior and how loud the birds are becoming because the people are quiet. Isn't that
Wow, that's so
fascinating?
interesting.
So I
Yeah.
think for everybody who's walking around as part of your self-care, start listening to the birds. Start
Yeah, no kidding.
connecting, right?
Yeah, you could like meditate to the birds as you're walking.
Right, right. And I think the more that we connect to nature, the more we do connect to ourselves as well. And
Hmm.
now, as a last and final question, Carly, the void that is sometimes created, right, when a person dies, I think, for us, there's going to be a void as well. This traumatic experience is going to create a void. But speaking to grief specifically, how can people, you don't want to fill the void with negative things, but how can people sort of heal? How can they heal those wounds of grief?
Hmm. I think a good, obviously, there's so many kind of quotes and things going around right now, but one that I just thought of was one that speaks to the fact that when we, come out of this, whatever that's going to look like, obviously it's going to look a lot different. Um, when we go back to normal, what things that were your normal before do you want to bring with you? So I think, in relating that to grief, we use the phrase new normal. So when you've experienced the death of someone in your life, you have a new normal, and you can shape that into, whatever you want it to be. So I think the idea of, continuing a relationship with the person who died is important. How do you want that to look? For me, it started as journaling to my sister. I've gotten tattoos. For sure, music is something that connects me with her. I still wear some of her clothes. So I think, finding whatever works for you and how you want that person to be represented in your life. And like, this is such a weird time right now. Again, for everybody, but specifically for people who are grieving. Being gentle with yourself is so important. I think, when that initial kind of period, once we've experienced a death, it is so shocking. You probably feel numb and raw, and you're not even really able to understand what is happening in your life. That's normal when you've experienced a sudden death or any type of death. And then kind of after that period, after, you kind of get to the point where you're able to create a new normal, recognizing that your grief is probably going to forever, it's going to continue changing. We don't stop grieving once someone important to us has died. We'll always love and miss that person. But, hopefully you can feel empowered in bringing that person into your future new normal, however you want to, and recognizing that you can grieve in different ways as you continue moving forward with your own life.
That's beautiful. Thank you. Absolutely. And I like that idea of, whatever we've learned now, and it's so compounded. If you are already isolated and you are, going through a loss of a loved one at this point in time, and we see the numbers, it's not unrealistic to think that there's a lot of people who are listening to this, that would need that comforting, just be kind to yourself, be gentle, take it one step at a time. In terms of the programs that you guys are doing virtually, is it still just locally based, or is it now expanded because it's virtual?
Yeah, good question. We've never had any like stipulations on our program, so people have driven from different places on Ontario to come. There are 10 affiliates of Bereaved Families of Ontario across Ontario, but unfortunately, it's a pretty big province, so that doesn't quite meet every community. But I did just have someone email me last week from British Columbia asking if they could participate, and we're open to that. There's enough grief to go around, and if we can support someone, whether they're in British Columbia, whether they're in Ontario, grief's pretty universal. So if
Absolutely.
people want to access the support, absolutely.
Oh, wonderful. So if it's okay, we'll put the links in the description below, and people can, find out all about you. And it is a not-for-profit, correct? So people
That's
can
right.
donate too?
Yeah, which is a really good thing to bring up because today is Giving Tuesday now. So we, as along with so many other charities and nonprofits, are really pushing for donations right now, and recognizing that this is such a hard time for so many people. But it's been really cool to see throughout the day people supporting different nonprofits and charities in our communities and across Canada. But all of the support that we offer, all of our programs, is completely free. So that should never be an issue for anyone.
Oh, and that's wonderful, because I think, at this point, definitely we have to support anybody who is supporting us, right? We have to do that anyway, but especially now that the spotlight is sort of on places like bereaved families, it is so important. And I feel too, and I said this in a different episode, if you're in a very good position and you're in an abundant position in this time, really your contribution is going to make a huge difference, right? And it's part of that giving back, feeling purposeful, and that it's going to good people, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Yeah. I think it's, there's there never is a lack of places to give to, but I feel like especially now with, what small businesses are experiencing, what other charities and nonprofits are experiencing. So, obviously it'd be great. I should push to donate to Bereaved Families of Ontario. But I think it's important to, find what resonates with you, and who do you want to support during this time, when so many people are struggling. Yeah, like I said, there's definitely not a lack of good places out there to support.
Absolutely. And I will put it on my Facebook page. So anybody watching, they can go to my Facebook page and I'll put the little donate button on there. So do consider that. That's great. Well, Carly, thank you so much for your time. This was absolutely fantastic. And I look forward to the follow-up.
Yes, I do too. Thank you, Christine. This was awesome. It's so great talking to you. And I hope, people are able to take a little piece of this, little piece from this, and recognize that they're not alone in their grief experience, especially right now.
Thank you so much. That is so empowering. Thanks, Carly. We'll chat again soon.
Bye, Christine. Thank you.
If you have experienced loss in the form of the death of somebody you love, we have a guided journal that gently helps you through the healing process. Sign up at journalingthrough.life and start your journal. Keep journaling and keep growing.